When did you find out you were going to have twins?
About 5 months, actually.
Was Ricky Nelson really a broke man when he lost his life in that tragic 1985 plane crash? At the time, it certainly looked that way. He was deep in debt, drained by a divorce that cost over $1 million and surrounded by unpaid bills. Most believed his children would be left with nothing but sorrow and a mountain of financial trouble. Then something unexpected happened. A hidden will turned up, one even his family had not seen. What exactly did Ricky leave behind that made his family cry? Stay tuned to find out. Early career years. Eric Hilliard Nelson was born on May 8, 1940, in Teaneck, New Jersey. He grew up in a family already well-rooted in the entertainment business. His father, Ozzie Nelson, had been a successful swing band leader, and his mother, Harriet Hilliard Nelson, sang in Ozzie's band and worked as an actress. By the time Ricky was born, both parents had already made names for themselves in radio and music. In 1941, the Nelsons moved to Hollywood, where they bought a two-story Cape Cod colonial house at 1822 Camino Palmero. As a result of their constant touring, Ricky first stayed in Tenafly, New Jersey with his grandmother, but by 1942, he had joined his parents in California. Ricky's early childhood was not easy. He had severe asthma and depended on a vaporizer with eucalyptus oil to breathe at night. He was quiet, shy, and uneasy around adults. His demeanor was very different from the energetic world he was surrounded by. He began school in Los Angeles, attending Gardner Street Elementary and Bancroft Junior High, before entering Hollywood High School in 1954. He played sports like tennis and football, but disliked the rigid routine of school life. He later said the buildings smelled like pencils and mornings came too early. Although he did not enjoy school, his parents ensured that he maintained a B average. Ozzie and Harriet closely monitored Ricky's income, which was high enough to fall under a 93% tax bracket before he was 18. To prevent him from becoming spoiled, they established trust accounts and limited his spending money to $50 per week. In 1944, Ozzie and Harriet launched their radio show, The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet. Initially, they hired child actors to portray Ricky and David, but by 1949, the real boys joined the cast. Ricky made his radio debut in Invitation to Dinner. From the beginning, he shaped the show with the long-term goal of bringing it to television. In 1952, the family starred in Here Come the Nelsons, a feature film that served as a transition to television. On October 3, 1952, the show moved to television, eventually becoming one of the longest-running sitcoms in history. Ricky played himself in the scripted family scenes, gaining confidence and national attention. Ozzie and Harriet built the television show to mirror their family life. The set was designed to resemble their own home. Ricky, though reserved in real life, came across as charming and confident on screen. His father directed many episodes and used the show to give Ricky increasing screen time. Harriet supported Ricky's early success but was strict about his behavior, particularly regarding his dating. As Ricky became more popular, his image was carefully shaped and protected by both parents. By the time Ricky reached his mid-teens, music had taken hold of him. He admired performers like Carl Perkins and Elvis Presley and practiced guitar, drums, and clarinet. He often sang in private, even using the showers at the Los Angeles Tennis Club for their acoustics. At age 16, he boasted to his girlfriend, Diana Osborne, that he would make a record. Though he had no contract, his father arranged a deal with Verve Records. In 1957, Ricky recorded I'm Walkin' and A Teenager's Romance. He performed I'm Walkin' during an episode of the family television show. The single reached #2 on the Billboard Hot 100. His first album, Ricky, came out that same year and reached #1. Ricky also found success in film. He had a role in The Story of Three Loves in 1953 and appeared in Here Come the Nelsons. At age 18, he was cast in Rio Bravo, a Western directed by Howard Hawks, where he starred alongside John Wayne and Dean Martin. He played Colorado, a young gunfighter, and sang in the film. His performance earned him a Golden Globe nomination for Most Promising Male Newcomer. Ricky's personal life during these years was also closely watched by his parents. Harriet, especially, was concerned about his dating life and did not approve of many of his girlfriends. At 17, Ricky dated Marianne Gaba, who appeared as his girlfriend in 3 episodes of the show. Harriet believed the relationship was a distraction. Later, Ricky fell in love with Lori Collins, a 15-year-old country singer. They wrote music together, including his first original composition, My Gal. Lori introduced Ricky to musicians like Johnny Cash and Tex Ritter. Talks of marriage were quickly stopped by Harriet, who said they were too young, and Ricky's career came first. By the time he turned 18, Ricky Nelson had become one of the most famous young entertainers in America. He was a television star, a recording artist with dozens of hits, and a promising actor. His rise was carefully guided by his parents, whose own careers laid the groundwork for his success. The Nelson family's radio and television programs provided Ricky with a national platform that few others could access. Transition to adulthood. Ricky Nelson entered adulthood in the early 1960s with a string of popular hits such as Poor Little Fool and Travelin' Man. By then, he was already known across the United States as a former teen star, but he wanted to grow beyond that image. As the decade progressed, Nelson began shifting his style away from the clean pop sound that first brought him fame. As his career progressed, Ricky, who was not allowed to date, finally found someone who earned his parents' approval and was from a Hollywood elite family. Ricky Nelson met Sharon Kristen Harmon in 1961 within the circles of Hollywood families. Both came from households well known in the entertainment industry. Ricky was the son of Ozzie and Harriet Nelson, stars of The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet. At the same time, Kristen was born on June 25, 1945, daughter of Tom Harmon, a former football star turned broadcaster, and actress Elise Knox. The families moved in similar social circles in Los Angeles, and through mutual acquaintances at gatherings linked to the entertainment industry, Ricky, then aged 21, first noticed Kristen. He was drawn to her looks and poise. At 16, Kristen was impressed by Ricky's fame and charm. Their relationship took root quickly, shaped by their common experience of being visible in public life. Ricky and Kristen were married on April 20, 1963, at St. Martin of Tours Catholic Church in Los Angeles. The wedding, attended by 400 guests, followed the birth of Kristen's pregnancy and was described as a shotgun wedding. She was 17, and Ricky was 22. Their daughter, Tracy, was born on October 25, 1963. The ceremony was a formal Catholic service lasting approximately 30 minutes and drew significant media attention, with papers like the Desert Sun referring to the couple as Hollywood royalty. The wedding adhered strictly to societal expectations and reflected the values of Kristen's family. Her father, Tom Harmon, held strong Catholic beliefs and opposed premarital relations. The need to follow religious practices and respect public expectations led to the swift wedding. After the ceremony, Kristen joined The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet as a regular cast member, taking on the role of Ricky's wife on screen. This decision merged their personal and professional lives. Ricky, raised Protestant, agreed to convert to Catholicism to marry Kristen. Her family required that he undergo religious instruction and participate in baptism and catechism classes. The transformation was not born of deep faith, but was necessary for the church-sanctioned marriage and aligned with the expectations set by the Harmon family and the public. Kristen grew up in a well-known Los Angeles household shaped by her father's discipline and her mother's acting career. She attended Marymount High School, a Catholic girls' school, and was involved in the city's cultural scene from a young age. Artistic by nature, she later explored painting and acting. Before her marriage, she had no notable professional credits, but her family's standing gave her a public presence. By joining her husband's television show for 29 episodes, she blended her role with her expanding public identity, reflecting the merger of two entertainment families. Ozzie and Harriet Nelson closely guided Ricky's career and personal life. They allowed Kristen into the family in part because her background aligned with their values. Ricky's earlier romantic interests had caused concern. He had dated Marianne Gaba, a model, and Lori Collins, a country singer, both of whom his parents had dismissed for reasons of propriety or image. Kristen, by contrast, came from a family they respected, sharing a religious upbringing and public standing. Her acceptance into their household was reflected in public statements, which called the wedding a joyful occasion and her presence on their show. The decision for Kristen to appear on screen and for Ricky to convert to another religion was less about spotlighting their status and more about protecting the family's public image. For Ozzie and Harriet, maintaining a stable and marketable family image was essential. Including Kristen in the show and ensuring a church-recognized marriage reinforced that narrative and set the stage for the years that followed. By the mid-1960s, he leaned into a country rock blend that shaped the next phase of his career. He formed the Stone Canyon Band and recorded Garden Party, a track written after an experience at Madison Square Garden in October 1971, where audience members booed his new music. The song's refrain, "You cannot please everyone, so you've got to please yourself," became one of his most quoted lines. It reached number 6 on the Billboard Hot 100 in 1972 and was his final major chart success. Although Garden Party gave Nelson a temporary boost, he struggled to maintain widespread commercial attention. The arrival of the British invasion, led by the Beatles, shifted musical tastes and pushed many early rock and roll acts into the background. Nelson's recordings for Decca in the early 1960s still entered the charts, but by the end of the decade he was playing smaller venues. Bars, college campuses, and supper clubs replaced the large stages he had once commanded. Some of his best audiences came from college students who were more open to his new style. However, Nelson's refusal to rely heavily on his earlier hits made it harder for him to regain mainstream popularity. He was ahead of his time and was willing to risk his career for the sake of artistic expression. Nelson's acting work, which had included key roles in films such as Rio Bravo in 1959, became less frequent. Although he occasionally appeared on television, most notably as the host of Saturday Night Live in 1979, he kept his primary focus on music. In the early 1980s, a wave of renewed interest in rockabilly music, spurred by younger groups such as the Stray Cats, brought some attention back to Nelson. He began using the name Ricky again and toured England in 1985 as part of a nostalgia circuit, where audiences responded well. However, efforts to find the same reception in the United States were unsuccessful. Ricky Nelson and his wife, Kristen Harmon, lived a life that mirrored the glamour expected of Hollywood couples. They took expensive vacations, bought sports cars, and carried out costly home renovations. In 1980, they purchased Errol Flynn's former home on Mulholland Drive for $750,000, a steep price considering their financial troubles. The couple had limited experience in managing their finances. Nelson reportedly did not write his first check until he was in his 40s. Most of their financial matters were handled by business managers, and neither one kept a close eye on spending. Even as a teenager, Nelson had earned large sums. At the height of his fame in the late 1950s, he was making more than $500,000 annually and paying taxes at a rate of 93%. His parents, Ozzie and Harriet, maintained control of his earnings through trust funds, giving him only limited access. As an adult, that structure contributed to a lack of financial planning. Kristen's spending added to their difficulties. They hosted parties filled with celebrities, expensive clothing, and home upgrades that strained their finances. The image they presented to the public as a glamorous, successful family masked a growing problem beneath the surface. They had 4 children together: Tracy, twins Gunnar and Matthew, and Sam. During their early years, Kristen joined Ricky on the adventures of Ozzie and Harriet, portraying his wife in a storyline that reflected their real marriage. By 1975, the marriage was under severe strain. Kristen's unhealthy habit began to affect her parenting, and staff members looked after the children in her absence. Nelson's issues with substance and his casual attitude toward romantic relationships added more pressure. He reportedly admitted to being with thousands of women. Their carefully crafted public image collapsed as stories of substance use and emotional distance surfaced. In 1977, Kristen filed for divorce, asking for alimony, custody, and part of their shared property. They briefly reconciled, but by 1980 she filed again. The divorce, finalized in December 1982, was drawn out in public. Kristen accused Ricky of hiding assets, though he was deeply in debt. He alleged that her unhealthy habit made her an unfit parent. Legal fees, accounting costs, and court battles consumed over $1 million. Ricky was required to pay $4,000 each month in child support. Though they shared custody, their conflicts spilled into the media, damaging Ricky's reputation. Kristen's family, especially her father, Tom Harmon, strongly disapproved of the divorce due to their Catholic faith. After the separation, Kristen continued to face issues. In 1987, she lost custody of their youngest son, Sam, in a court case involving her brother, Mark Harmon. Ricky Nelson's financial situation had worsened throughout the 1970s and early 1980s. With few hit songs, high spending, and legal costs, he ended up in debt. At the time of his divorce, he owed over $1 million. Earlier in life, he had rented private jets and made large purchases with little concern for cost. The trust funds established by his parents did not provide him with sufficient access to cash. He played smaller venues and accepted payment based on ticket sales, which were often low. At one event in Alabama, he performed for a fraction of his earlier fees. The pressure from child support and other legal obligations meant he had to continue touring, even when it was no longer profitable. Ricky Nelson's career decline happened slowly. New styles of music, especially the rise of British bands in the 1960s, changed what radio stations played. While Nelson's move into country rock brought some artistic freedom, it cost him many early fans. He avoided falling back on his teen idol image, which limited his appeal in the growing nostalgia market. His performance at Madison Square Garden in 1971, when the crowd rejected his newer songs, was a public sign of this disconnect. During the late 1970s, he made fewer records and depended heavily on live shows. These concerts were smaller and paid less, but he had little choice. His 1985 tour in England was a rare bright moment, though attempts to repeat its success in the United States did not last. In his later years, Ricky Nelson's life was marked by efforts to rebuild a career in a changing world, strained personal relationships, and deepening financial problems. The music that once made him a national star became less popular, and he struggled to find a new place in the industry. His marriage to Kristen Harmon, once seen as part of a perfect Hollywood story, broke apart under the weight of constant travel and clashing expectations. Their way of life, driven by spending and appearance, ended in hardship. The divorce left lasting damage financially and emotionally. While his early achievements in rock and roll are respected, Ricky Nelson's adult years reveal a quieter, more complex story behind the fame. Final years. In the final months of 1985, Rick Nelson faced a difficult period as he worked to revive his music career. Now 45 years old, he had not topped the charts since his hit Garden Party in 1972. His earnings came from relentless touring, mostly in modest venues and nostalgia events, as he sought to connect with audiences once more. From December 26 to December 31, 1985, Nelson toured the southern United States with shows in Orlando, Florida, Guntersville, Alabama, and a planned New Year's Eve performance in Dallas, Texas. In December 1985, Rick Nelson played at PJ's Alley, a small club in Guntersville owned by musician Pat Upton. The venue was a stark contrast to the grand stages of his teen idol heyday, symbolizing the more humble reality of his later career. Despite a long-standing fear of flying, he arranged to travel to Dallas on a private Douglas DC-3. At about 5:15 p.m. on December 31, 1985, the plane crash-landed in a field near DeKalb, Texas, after a cabin fire broke out. Nelson and 6 others passed away in the wreck. By the early 1980s, Nelson's music career had faded over nearly a decade. With the rise of British bands and shifting musical trends, his early rockabilly-influenced country rock style did not regain widespread traction. His time with Capitol Records, beginning in 1981, produced an album titled Playing to Win, which reached number 153 on the Billboard chart and made him the first artist to chart in 4 consecutive decades. Despite including a new version of his old hit, Believe What You Say, the album failed to make a lasting commercial impact, and his time with Capitol ended soon after. The rockabilly revival of 1985, led by bands such as the Stray Cats, brought some renewed interest in Nelson. Reclaiming his teen idol name Ricky, he released Ricky Nelson, All My Best, a compilation of his early hits. A nostalgia tour in England that year received a warm reception, with audiences eager to hear the songs that made him famous. Paul McCartney even expressed interest in producing a new album for him at Sun Studios, though Capitol did not approve. Nelson also joined forces with artists like Fats Domino on tour, playing to appreciative crowds across smaller venues. Nelson continued to work hard, performing up to 200 nights a year, often in bars and college halls, to maintain his income. Although he had made television appearances, including hosting Saturday Night Live in 1979 and acting in series such as The Hardy Boys and Nancy Drew Mysteries, these efforts did little to revive his musical career in the United States. The England tour brought hope, and the southern dates were meant to build on that success, but the plane crash ended those plans. To support his hectic schedule, Nelson bought a Douglas DC-3 in May 1985 for $118,000. The 14-seat twin-engine plane once belonged to the DuPont family and later to Jerry Lee Lewis. Painted white with gold and black trim, it was intended as a cost-effective alternative to chartered jets. Despite his fear of flying, Nelson could not bear long road trips, and the plane offered a faster route between tour stops. That plane had a history of mechanical issues. While owned by Lewis, it had been grounded often due to engine and heating system failures. Nelson was aware of these issues, and band members recounted that engine trouble had kept them from performing at the first Farm Aid in September 1985. Yet the plane remained in use, likely because financing it seemed more affordable than renting aircraft. On December 31, 1985, Nelson, his fiancée Helen Blair, and 5 members of his Stone Canyon band, along with sound technician Clark Russell, boarded the plane in Guntersville. Helen Blair, age 27, was a former model and exotic animal trainer who had traveled with Nelson since 1980. About 5:14 p.m., pilot Brad Rank reported smoke in the cabin to air traffic controllers. According to the National Transportation Safety Board, the fire likely began with a gasoline-powered heater. Rank tried to land the plane in a field near DeKalb. The aircraft struck power lines, a utility pole, and trees. Its magnesium frame later ignited, producing a blaze that firefighters took more than 2 hours to control. The pilot and co-pilot escaped with severe burns. Rank suffered burns over 10% of his body, and his co-pilot, Kenneth Ferguson, sustained burns over 40%. The passengers, however, were unable to exit the cabin. Autopsies confirmed that Nelson, Blair, and all passengers lost their lives from smoke and fire rather than the crash itself. Rumors that substance use triggered the fire were disproven by National Transportation Safety Board tests, which found only trace levels of cocaine metabolites and Darvon in Nelson's system, and no substance use equipment on the plane. The crash killed 7 people: Rick Nelson, 45, singer and bandleader; Helen Blair, 27, Nelson's fiancée; Bobby Neal, 38, guitarist; and Patrick Woodward, 35, bassist. After Ricky Nelson's demise, his estate entered a long period of financial disputes, especially with record labels over unpaid royalties. A significant part of these disputes centered on digital downloads and streaming revenue. In 2011, Nelson's children, acting through the Rick Nelson Company Incorporated, filed a lawsuit against Capitol Records. The suit claimed that Capitol underreported royalty payments and held back large amounts of money. According to the estate, Capitol controlled between $100 million and $250 million in what it called unmatched income. These were funds the label said it could not link to any specific artist, but Nelson's heirs believed a portion belonged to Ricky. The lawsuit stated that Capitol failed to follow a 1992 agreement that raised Ricky Nelson's royalty rate. That agreement increased his payment from 5% of 90% of album sales to 10% of the retail list price for complete price records. For licensed sales, the agreement gave him 50% of net receipts. An audit revealed that Capitol had avoided sharing full royalty details, making it difficult to determine what Nelson's estate owed. This lack of transparency became a key part of the case. In a separate lawsuit filed in 2018, the estate also brought a class action claim against Sony Music. This suit involved Nelson's later recordings under Epic Records, which was part of Sony. It accused the label of withholding international streaming royalties. Public records did not list specific amounts in this case, but the estate believed it had not been paid correctly for income from overseas digital platforms. Capitol Records and Sony Music were the leading companies involved in the royalty disputes. Ricky Nelson had signed with Capitol in 1981, releasing Playing to Win, but the album did not do well, and he was dropped. Earlier in his career, he had released many of his biggest songs, including Poor Little Fool and Travelin' Man, with Imperial and Decca Records. These two labels later became part of Universal Music Group, but they were not the focus of the lawsuits filed in 2011 and 2018. The Capitol case concerned royalties from Nelson's work during the 1980s and digital sales of that period. The Sony case dealt with his 1970s music, including the period around Garden Party. David Nelson, Ricky's older brother, served as the administrator of his estate. In 2011, David led the legal action against Capitol Records. He worked with attorneys Neville and Douglas Johnson of the firm Johnson & Johnson. The estate requested restitution, damages, and recovery of funds based on claims of breach of contract, fraud, and unfair business practices. David focused on reclaiming unpaid royalties from Capitol's digital and streaming income reporting. In April 2014, the lawsuit ended with an out-of-court settlement. Los Angeles Superior Court Judge Joseph Kalin dismissed the case after the parties reached an agreement. Details of the settlement were not made public. However, attorney Neville Johnson stated that Nelson's heirs were satisfied with the result and hoped to work with Capitol to preserve Nelson's musical legacy. David Nelson also helped protect the estate from other financial threats. Kristen Nelson, Ricky's ex-wife, tried to gain control of life insurance benefits, but her claim was denied. David blocked other claims as well, including one from the parents of Helen Blair, Ricky's fiancée, who filed a wrongful death suit. Through these actions, David helped move the estate from being about $1 million in debt to becoming a profitable family trust. Ricky Nelson's most significant commercial hits remained vital to his earnings long after their release. Poor Little Fool, written by Sharon Shealy, was the first #1 song on the Billboard Hot 100 in July of 1958. It sold over 2 million copies and generated substantial royalties. Travelin' Man, written by Jerry Fuller, also became a #1 hit in 1961. Its B-side, Hello Mary Lou, reached #2 in England. These two records were among Nelson's most lucrative, helping him remain financially stable during his peak years. In total, Ricky Nelson had 53 songs on the Billboard Hot 100 chart, and those tracks were crucial to the estate's claims in royalty disputes. Ricky Nelson had written a will 4 months before his passing. He gave his entire estate to his 4 children with Kristen Harmon, Tracy, Gunnar, Matthew, and Sam. The will made no provision for Helen Blair, his fiancée, or for Kristen, his ex-wife. It also excluded Eric Crew, a son born outside of marriage whose existence had been acknowledged, but who was not legally part of the inheritance. David Nelson, acting as administrator, made sure the estate was divided according to the will. He defended it against multiple legal challenges, including a claim from Kristen for life insurance money and a suit from Helen Blair's family. Through his work, David upheld his brother's final wishes and helped preserve the estate for Ricky Nelson's children. Do you like the way Ricky preserved the family's legacy? Let's hear from you in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Before you go, watch the other videos on your screen.